Hello friends, we have Professor Payal Nagpal who teaches English in Janki Devi Memorial College, Delhi University, and she'll be taking up the poet D.H. Lawrence for discussion today with respect to one or two poems. And about D.H. Lawrence, all of us know about him. He was basically, majorly a fiction writer, a writer of novels and short stories, but he also wrote prose in general and poetry in particular, because his poetry was as intense almost as his novels were. And we have Professor Payal Nagpal today, discussing one particular poem called Snake. And just by way of sharing with you, I read this poem in translation way back in the 1950s in a Hindi magazine. And everybody was talking about this poem at that time also. And good that she has chosen this poem for us today. And let's see the implications that are hidden in this poem for us even today, even though it was written in the previous century and in the middle of it. So over to Professor Payal Nagpal. Please begin your discussion.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. And I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that you read this poem back in the 1950s in a Hindi magazine, because this is a poem, I think, that has, there is something in it that it remains relevant to this date. So a poem which obviously had something in it that it was considered important enough to be translated and published in a Hindi magazine. And even today, the critics are looking at this particular poem, The Snake, in very different ways. So be it the Anthropocene, be it posthumanism, so different approaches that are used. And of course, we do have the classical idea of, the way in which this poem is to be really looked at. The way it was maybe interpreted immediately after it was published. So I think the poem is creating with it a kind of critical legacy that I think if we were to interrogate would take us back into the reasons why critics adopted certain approaches. So it would be a reflection of the times in which this poem was understood in different ways. So here, this is a picture of D.H. Lawrence from 1929, and Lawrence was born in 1885, in a working class neighborhood in Nottingham, and this is clearly visible in his novels. He grew up in a mining town, and I think this is something that finds description in many novels, and especially Sons and Lovers. So apart from his novels, he wrote several poems. He also wrote prose, and his poetry collections include Love Poems and Others, which was published in 1913, Birds, Beasts and Flowers, that was published in 1923, and Pansies, which was published in 1929. So before we move to a detailed discussion of the poem called Snake, it's a poem with about 74 lines, and it would be a good idea to take a look at a very short poem by Lawrence to understand, really speaking, how in poetry he's making a connection with something that is organic in nature, almost like the intrinsic connection, really speaking, between humans and nature. And at the same time, he is critical of the way in which industrialization, development has changed things. And as we can see, a lot of these collections are from the 1920s. And this, to my mind at least, immediately brings the context of T.S. Eliot's poetry, how that is so very different in terms of writing, because we look at experimentation and writing and so on. But here, a lot of things are said in a direct manner, though at the same time, the poem is very, very layered. So how does this happen? Let's take a look at a short poem, very short poem by Lawrence, titled Piano. And softly in the dusk, a woman is singing to me, taking me back down the vista of years, till I see a child sitting under the piano in the boom of the tingling strings. and pressing the small, poised feet of a mother who smiles as she sings. In spite of myself, the insidious mastery of song betrays me back, till the heart of me weeps to belong to the old Sunday evenings at home with winter outside, and hymns in the cozy parlor, the tinkling piano, our guide. So now it is vain for the singer to burst into clamor with the great black piano appassionato. The glamour of childish days is upon me, my manhood is cast down in the flood of remembrance. I weep like a child for the past. So I think the picture, the poem is self-explanatory. It's clear. The picture that is created, the image that's created in the mind, is of a child sitting under the piano and pressing the mother's small poised feet, and who's smiling as she's singing. And the poet is reminded of old Sunday evenings and hymns in the cozy parlor. And this is what it is, this that determines his transition from childhood to manhood, as he says. And he says that this is important because the flood of remembrance makes him weep like a child for the past. So a question that arises here is Lawrence kind of, is his nostalgia regressive? Is he looking at a world gone by? Does he want to bring that back? Or does he raise the issue of the world gone by to comment upon the present? So I would probably go with the latter, thinking that he brings the mood of, the piano takes him to an earlier time, and he brings that mood back to remind the reader of what, really speaking, the reader has probably lost in the current scenario. So, and this of course has to do something with, this kind of, all of 19th century is done with industrialization, rise of middle class, establishment of railroads. All these things have already, they are in place. So there is something that is changing. And if you look at it, really speaking, the face of London, particularly the face of cities, had changed completely. And so he's thinking about a time when some kind of connect, between human beings really had more value. I'd request Professor Prakash, he's also kind of seen different responses to this particular poem. So that is Snake. But what would you say about a poem like like Piano?
No, you have raised the question very pertinently, the question of the use of the past to commend the present. And I would say yes, to an extent that is true. Lawrence is evoking the 19th century scene, social scene, and back home on a Sunday, he's the child is very indulgent towards his mother, and the mother is spreading a kind of influence all around him. So you can see the sensuousness there in the poem.
Yes.
The kind of presence that the mother gives to the child, the sense of it, and I think D.S. Lawrence was generally obsessed with the idea of the mother and the child,
Yes.
and he took up as a major theme the sons and lovers,
Yes.
and that also would be somewhere there, and I believe it's a very soft poem, and he is known for his references to the human body and to the woman and sexuality and all those things, but then basically he touches everything with a soft kind of eye, and he comments on the world. So definitely the poem becomes a telling comment on the present, when the present time for him is being attacked and criticized by what do you call industrialization, rightly.
Absolutely. In fact, I completely agree with you. And so, whether it is sensuousness or whether it is, the whole idea of the Freudian idea of the Oedipal complex. So, Lawrence's not just his fiction, but poetry also opens itself up to these multiple impulses in his own life and multiple influences that one sees in his poetry, which is why I think uh, critical reception to his poetry is varied and very, very vast, and has changed probably with a change in the decade. So at one point, of course, he says that we can get rid of stereotype movements and the old hackneyed associations of sound or sense. We can break down those artificial conduits and canals through which we do so love to force our utterance. But we cannot positively prescribe any motion, any rhythm. So he says that a lot of things can be done, but he seems to be making a case for something that is natural, that belongs in a sense to the real natural world. And within this, of course, the even if you look at piano, the relationship between the child and the mother. So that too, is part of I think Lawrence's theory of understanding the positioning of human beings. So with this, we move on to the poem that will be discussed today, that is Snake. And this is a 74 line poem, initially published in the Dial in 1921. There is conjecture that the poem was probably written in Sicily in 1920, and the first book in which it's finally published is Birds, Beasts and Flowers. So this, if again, as I said, 1920s, we should always, really speaking, keep at the back of our mind the modernist period and the kind of literary experimentation that that period brought in, and how Lawrence's poetry, at least I would say, makes quite a departure from that. So here it's interesting to mark that in the 1920s, he's not particularly convinced about the whole Freudian aspect of the way in which especially the id is understood, and he actually critiques, attacks Freud in a book that's written in 1921, Psychoanalysis and the Unconscious. So which means that we also need to understand that if Lawrence is looking at the feelings that are suppressed, or in a sense the primal feelings, so how is he doing it? If we just look at the first couple of lines, I think this idea of an intense sexuality, sensuousness, is to be seen in his poetry, and one can say the same for his novels. And I think the both, really speaking, draw attention to the way in which a kind of sensuousness is to be projected in literature. So here are the first couple of lines. A snake came to my water trough on a hot, hot day, and I in pajamas for the heat to drink there. In the deep, strange scented shade of the great carob tree, I came down the steps with my pitcher. So immediately one can see that the poet's attention is drawn towards a snake that has come to its water trough, and at the same time the reference to the heat, the hot day, indicates, of course, critics have also interpreted these lines to indicate a kind of suppressed sexuality. So in the deep, strange scented shade of the day, a dark carob tree. Now here I think the one question that we need to ask is, why is it just simply that here is a animal that has come from not the civilized society, this is an animal coming from the wild? Is that why the snake catches his attention, or does it go beyond that? So there is a kind of build-up in this particular poem, and we move from this initial kind of surprise at the snake, almost as if he is just come in like a guest to the water trough, and how his outlook towards the snake and his own responses change in the course of the poem. So to continue this further, and must wait, must stand and wait, for there he was at the trough before me. So before me almost indicates as if the snake is there to, almost meet the poet who's carrying the pitcher. And he reached down from to continue these lines. So the snake is described further, how he reaches from a fissure in the earth wall, and he trails his yellow brown slackness. Now, yellow brown here is important because there's a reference to snakes that are poisonous and snakes that are not. So, yellow brown indicates that this was the golden snake. So, soft bellied and down over the edge of the stone trough. While we're discussing snake, at the same time, the whole idea of the biblical concept of the role performed by the serpent is also to be kind of kept at the back of one's mind, to make a comparison to see how he's almost inverting that the Edenic myth, really speaking. So how this soft-bellied serpent is standing at the edge now of the stone trough and resting his throat on the stone bottom. Here again, I'd request Professor Prakash to comment in a sense on the description of the snake, and how the poet's attention is totally, he's almost mesmerized watching the snake.
And actually, as you were explaining the significance of the snake in the poem, I was thinking of Milton's treatment of it in Paradise Lost, where Eve for the first time has a look at the snake, and it's Satan for Milton. But then Milton is in a way equating himself at that point of time with Eve, and Eve is fascinated by the snake and calls it poor you, poor it, and things
Yes.
like that. So I think D.S. Lawrence would have thought about this particular image in Paradise Lost, and both of them were humanists. Milton was a great humanist, and so is our poet today. And they look at the creature as some kind of an extension of nature. And human beings also are some kind of manifestation of nature itself in so many ways. So the snake and the poet communicating with each other, and particularly the poet responding to it, actually both of them share that background of nature in their blood.
Absolutely, and which is why the instead of Milton, I'd refer to the biblical myth, that itself is kind of almost inverted with the way in which, because by the time one reaches the end of the poem and the way the poet is critical of himself, it reminds us of the fact that the snake, really speaking, is as much a part of nature, as much a part of this world as are humans. So what, really speaking, does the snake represent in that sense? So we'll discuss it. And at the same time, I think the entire setup, the way in which different images are evoked here, I think something needs to be said about D.H. Lawrence's style of writing, because where, let's say, in modernist poetry, it becomes very difficult. One has to kind of read and reread and then gradually unpack ideas. I think the writing style here of Lawrence is very evocative, because immediately it's as if one can just see different images. So, this snake that is at the water trough, and how the snake reaches from a fissure in the earth wall, and the way in which the body of the snake is described, the yellow-brown slackness and soft-bellied down. So almost suggests this kind of languor, in a sense, on a hot summer day. So again, further, and then he says that how the water had dripped from the tap in a small clearness, and the snake starts sipping the water with his straight mouth and drinks through his straight gums, and how it moves into his slack long body. So it's almost as if the way in which, if a human being were to drink water, and the movement of the water through the throat can be palpable. Similarly, here the poet's attention is totally It's almost as if the poet is transfixed, is just watching the snake and how the water drips from the tap. So the way in which it moves, not just through his mouth, through the straight mouth, but through the gums. So here we have a poet who has paid a lot of attention not just to the idea that he's expressing in his poem, but to the very body of the snake, the way in which this animal is being described. And the reason why it is important is because today critics would understand this poem very differently from an earlier time where one would look at it in terms of psychoanalysis and sexuality, but to look and acknowledge that here is this member who's part of nature and the organicity that is in nature. So I think that is very important. So to refer to a few lines, someone was before me at my water trough, and I, like a second comer, waiting. So it's almost as if he's come to fill up the pitcher, and he becomes the second comer, and the snake is the one who's there before him. Human beings would otherwise quite reverse this and say that they have the first right to the water from the tap, and would want to remove the snake. So I think here Lawrence is playing with this concept.
Well, certainly Lawrence is equating himself, with the snake, and seems to be saying something to the snake as if, they are both fellow beings and are parts of nature. And it's that way, that the poem is to be understood. It's such a soft poem to begin with, and, the biblical idea and the Christian ethos would always, associate the snake with Satan, and Milton, mixing the voice of the Christianity of the time, would say infernal snake. But that infernal snake is not there. It's a fellow being.
Yes.
Both of them are forms of life. And anyway, the poet has put himself down at the level of an animal, a loving animal, an animal who is seeking company with another fellow being, and that kind of softness is remarkable in the poem. So I agree with you. And friends, this kind of close intimacy and connection with nature and in the form of it, and in the form is of life, then that kind of ease and comfort that is there in the company of the snake is being communicated so well by this poem. So we come to the end of the discussion of this part, and very soon we will join again to take the idea further, and how the idea is explored by the poet in the later lines of the poem. Thank you.